Hello viewers, it is a proud privilege to welcome Dr. Dwight W. Allen, an eminent professor of educational reform, an expert in teacher education and micro-teaching, to our studios today. Dr. Allen is professionally accomplished in curriculum development, futuristic education, education media, educational administration, and Islamic and Baha'i views in education. Dr. Allen's ideas have been disseminated mainly in the form of books and films. He has also worked as a consultant to UNESCO, UNDP, Educational Mission to China, Staff Development Advisor, and Harvard Graduate School. Presently, Dr. Allen is with the Old Dominion University, Norfolk, Virginia, USA. So viewers, let us have a smooth sailing with Dr. Allen in the sea of teacher education. Dr. Allen, you've had a long experience in teacher education. You've also worked as a consultant to UNESCO with reference to educational reforms in third world countries. How do you visualize the futures of schooling and teacher education?
Well, I think that the best prediction is that whatever we can predict is likely to be a little bit inaccurate because the change is so fast and so pervasive. There are some things that we know for sure, however. We know that the rate of knowledge is expanding so rapidly that we're going to have new ways of dealing with knowledge and new knowledge in schools, that the old ways of having textbooks that last for 10 and 15 years aren't going to work anymore. So we're going to have better ways of introducing new subjects to the curriculum. We're also going to have to redefine the roles of teachers because at present, teachers are very self-contained autocrats and they have to know everything. And it's difficult for anyone to know everything, particularly when knowledge is changing so fast. And so I think that we're going to have to find ways to help teachers graciously learn from their students. Now, this goes to the second part of your question, namely the future of teacher training and teacher education. I think that we're going to have to find ways to train teachers in new roles, but this is not only going to be the case in pre-service education, but I think we're going to have to develop much more systematically the concept of lifetime education for teachers. I think it may very well be that teacher education institutions will develop a lifetime relationship with their students because the demands of knowledge and instructional design will both continue to change markedly. So I really believe that the future of teacher education is going to require a lot of imagination on our part, but in third world countries in particular, in the past I think teacher education has been inclined to be a little bit too theoretical, and that we can be much more practical about the training of teachers, which means we must be more practical in the training of teacher educators. Typically, teacher educators' training itself has been extremely theoretical and research-oriented and not very practice-oriented. And I think that we need to train teacher educators to be more comfortable in the practical education of teachers. And here I think we're going to see the incorporation of more specific skills of teaching. I think we're going to train teachers to learn from each other. I think we're going to find ways to involve teachers in peer observation of each other's classrooms so that teachers are not nearly so isolated. And we need to find ways to help teachers constantly experiment with new skills and new content. And if we can give teachers the kind of training that will allow them to expect to continue to do experiments in their own classroom, even if they're very small little experiments. If you had every teacher in India doing a small experiment with either new content or new methods every single year or every single semester, think of the body of evidence that we could very soon accumulate.
Dr. Allen, you were talking about the new kind of skills. Could you just elaborate what kind of new skills that you are talking of? I mean, you're hinting at.
Yes, well, You see, we find that teachers are often not very good in questioning skills, for example. And we can train teachers to ask more questions, to ask better questions, to ask questions more in depth, to ask follow-up questions, to help students learn how to question each other. You see, there's a variety of questioning skills. There's a variety of reinforcement skills. Encouragement, different ways of encouragement, the kinds of words you use for reinforcement, the tone of your voice, the timing of the reinforcement, the use of nonverbal reinforcement. I mean, leaning forward is always positive reinforcement. Leaning back is negative reinforcement. Looking away is negative reinforcement. Paying attention to your audience is positive reinforcement. So you see, to make teachers more familiar with and be more conscious about the actions that they exhibit, to be more encouraging of their students, to recognize another skill that is pervasive is trial and error learning. To understand that making mistakes is an expected part of the total educational process. That's very hard for teachers. We can train teachers so that they have kind of a repertoire of skills. Then, you see, leave it to their professional judgment how and when to use these skills. Right. Because otherwise, you see, it just becomes a kind of a very technical, robotic thing where teachers are just behaving on cue. And we want to leave the room for professional judgment and encourage teachers to be real professionals.
Dr. Allen, what is your opinion regarding curriculum reform in teacher education, especially keeping in mind the changing scenario?
Well, I alluded to that. I hinted at that already in the sense of making it more practical. Students really appreciate the practical parts of teacher education. I think we should have more practical experience earlier. I think, again, more collaborative opportunities for students to work together in teams and to use the students to critique each other so that all the criticism doesn't have to come from supervisors. I think that we're going to have much more emphasis on multicultural education. I mean, our societies, certainly the Indian society is the epitome of multiculturalism, as is American society, and teachers have to celebrate diversity. And I think that if teachers are not comfortable with multiculturalism and students of diverse backgrounds, then we can't expect that the students who they are training are going to be very comfortable. So multiculturalism is a very important subject which I would encourage every teacher educator to incorporate in their curriculum. But in addition, I think we have to have some specific course content in multicultural issues.
So Dr. Allen, can in a word we say that we've got to proact? Yes.
The idea of teachers being passive, I think you put it very well. That's a nice summary. Instead of teacher education being a passive process, it has to be an active process. And the teachers are going to have the responsibility to motivate their students to be proactive as well. So it is very hard for us to tell teachers to do something that we don't model for them. That's another one of the dimensions of teacher education curriculum. You see, I think part of the curriculum is our role as teacher educators as models and role examples. Another big issue, which is very important, is the role of values. I think teachers ought to be role models in terms of values and be upright and citizens and show a lot of integrity. Teachers worldwide would like to get rid of that role. They don't feel very comfortable having to be role models. They'd like to have kind of their own private life. But I don't think that's possible. I think that teachers are role models, whether they like it or not, and I would prefer they be good role models.
Oh, that's right. Coming back to microteaching, Dr. Allen, have you revised your earlier stand on the role of microteaching in teacher education programs?
Yes, microteaching has changed a lot. In earlier times, the model of microteaching, which is now being used in India, is a model that's about 20 or 25 years old and puts a lot of emphasis on technology and a lot of emphasis on being very precise and technical. in the newer model of microteaching, which was really developed in Namibia. I think that's very interesting. Microteaching has been going down in the United States, and we've been trying to analyze why. And we think that it's because microteaching was so closely linked with television and videotaping, and the microteaching protocols in terms of technical skills were so precise and demanding that it just got burdensome. And so we've simplified the model, and using Namibia as kind of our case study, we developed a version of microteaching which doesn't require any technology at all, which can be used by teachers on their own in schools. It gives the option of either teaching real students, in other words, bringing 4 or 5 students in to teach a microteaching lesson, or more frequently, having teachers teach each other in peer microteaching sessions. But what has remained the same is the idea of having an opportunity to teach, receive criticism, reteach, and receive criticism again. That's remained the same, that one microteaching session consists of teach, critique, reteach, critique, because again, feedback and reinforcement is the best way to learn something. And so when you're trying to help teachers learn new skills, to give them feedback and then an opportunity to practice those skills using the feedback is important. We've also developed a new technique as a part of microteaching, which can be used for supervision in any setting, called focused supervision, where supervisors simply give 2 compliments and then 2 suggestions and an opportunity for reflection. You say, and the 2 compliments come first, then the 2 suggestions, and the suggestions may relate to a specific skill, but if the supervisor doesn't feel comfortable in dealing with that skill or has seen something in the lesson that seems more important, the supervisor is free to make any 2 suggestions he or she wishes. These are then recorded, and either in the reteach session in microteaching or a subsequent visit in supervision, why then the supervisor has to be accountable in terms of whether either the suggestion was the wrong suggestion or the teacher has some responsibility in not being able to respond to it. Either way.
Dr. Allen, this new technique that you have talked of, the changed one, what is the receptivity of it? Is it that is going with a big bang like microteaching, the way you started earlier, or is it going to take some time?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, in the places where I've been working with it directly, both in Namibia and China, it's being very well received. Now, China is 1,000 Namibias. And in China, why we're trying to develop new microteaching protocols which will be used out at the provincial level with millions and millions of teachers. In Namibia, it's a much more directly hands-on kind of process and closely supervised. But I'm very hopeful. And in terms of it being adopted and adapted for other countries, because I think each country should develop its own version, I think part of that will depend on its dissemination and whether or not as a result of programs like this, why Indian researchers and teacher educators become excited, then I think that it can easily come to India because it's a very simple model. If people understand the essence of its simplicity, then you don't need a lot of experts like me running around telling you what to do. I think that you have very competent teacher educators that, given the spirit of the model, could very easily adapt it.
Doctor, what do you feel about the role of electronic media in schooling and teacher education?
Well, this is a problem, and one of the reasons it's a problem is because everybody is in favor of it, and everybody puts it near the top of their list of importance, but nobody can fund it. And the problem is that to make technology a real part of a curriculum at any level, you have to have an adequate capital funding, and then you have to have an adequate replacement budget, because the new media, the new technology get it out of date very quickly, and certainly no longer than a 5-year life. And so if you figure out how much it's going to cost to equip your television studios or bring online computers or whatever it is, then take about 20 to 30% of that and have that as an annual replacement budget. Now, you see, I think that if we think of a capital investment with a replacement budget, an ordinary replacement budget built in, then for a while at least we'll be much more modest in the way we think about technology and education, because we recognize the the reality that funds are extremely limited. I think research efforts should continue, and I'm very hopeful that in the near future, for example, all the students in the world will routinely be on email and will be connected to each other by internet. I think that's an absolutely fascinating thing to consider. And along with that, within the next 5 to 10 years, we can anticipate that all the libraries of the world will be available electronically to be downloaded by an individual student at their own computer terminal. Now, for that to work, of course, you have to have the computers there, and you have to have the modems or the link to the electronic highway. And at the moment, that is still beyond the resources of most educational systems. But if I were to make a guess, I would guess that the cost will come down dramatically, and that within 20 years, such access to the electronic highway will be routine in most of the schools of the world where they have access to electricity. I think the link will be by a direct satellite link.
Doctor, what should be the focus of research in teacher education?
Well, I've already hinted at this too a little bit when I said that I would hope that teachers would develop the expectation of doing regular research in their classrooms. I think this is a vast untapped potential that we tend to make research too big a deal and the province only of very senior researchers in very large research projects. And I think that we need another kind of action research in the classroom, and then we need another kind of research specialists who can collate this classroom research and give us some idea of what kinds of wisdom can be generalized from it. In addition, I think that ethnographic research, case study research, more subjective, holistic research is becoming much more popular in education. But I think there still is a role for quantitative research. Anything that can be counted should be. But I think that many of the important issues can't be easily counted, and rather than eliminate them as topics for research, I'd rather find other research models that we can use. So I think there's no shortage of topics for research in teacher education, starting with some of the specific skills of teaching and moving on to the kind of practical experience. We've not even talked at all about variations in teaching staff and the concept of the teacher and his or her staff in different levels of teaching in terms of master teachers and associate teachers, and a concept of internship where a teacher might have a 2 or 3 year association with their teacher education institution during a probationary practice period. There are many, many options, and I hope we are creative in terms of our research designs.
Let's hope so. Doctor, would you like to give a word of caution to our teacher educators?
I think the biggest problem is that we do not see the risk in standing still. We become fearful of the risk of trying new things, and the risk is there. We cannot ever try new things without risk, but I think there's an even greater risk in standing still, and so I think we need systematically to try lots of new things and to move on quickly when they don't work, and to understand the difference between something which isn't working because we haven't gotten used to it yet and something that isn't working because it's a bad idea. So we need to give new ideas a chance and understand the basic risk that's involved in all research, but the greater risk in doing nothing at all.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. It's been just wonderful interacting with you. We've really enjoyed. And viewers, we hope you enjoyed too.